Thank you for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. I'm very happy today to have a guest with me that I've really been looking forward to interviewing. I got to know Lucas Bale through the Tales of Tinfoil anthology. Mostly, I'd been familiar with his work, but got to talk with him and several other authors, as well as David Gatewood, when we did a special roundtable for Tales of Tinfoil that was so much fun. And at the end of that, I emailed Lucas and I said, I've got to get you on the show for a one-on-one interview. It was just too much fun, and I felt like that we could have really dug deeper into some topics. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Lucas Bale.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to start off by asking the question that I ask all authors that come on, and that's, will you please give us a brief introduction to you, and what was the thing that made you want to become a writer?
I think I'll deal with the second one first, because I think it probably best. When I was a kid, my sister is mentally handicapped, so she took up a massive amount of my parents' time, and as a consequence, when I was a kid, where I found my sort of comfort was in books, and I was reading books from, I think, the age of 5, and I was pretty much the world's biggest geek back then, and probably now. And I just I stumbled into fantasy and science fiction. I was as a kid as well, and I think I just kept reading and reading and reading, and I think I was taken by these fantastic worlds where I was, either being, where I was these characters in role-playing games, or reading about these amazing people, Tolkien's heroes in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And I think I would just walk along, go for long walks, and I'd write these stories in my head. I think probably every writer has these stories when they were kids and did the same thing. But I just never wrote them down. I never really thought that I was good enough to do that sort of thing. And there just came a point where it just sort of drifted to the back of my mind. And then I was a lawyer for 15 years, a criminal lawyer. And there just came a point where I started doing some work editing adventure travel magazines and writing for adventure travel magazines. And I experienced a little bit of success doing that. And I thought, maybe I could actually write these stories that I've had in my head for so long. So I started, really. I just started teaching myself how to do it. But that's really what inspired me to do it. And science fiction, because it was a love of mine, both in film and in book form, pretty much throughout the entirety of my youth, when I was a teenager, in my 20s at university, it was just the obvious place for me to explore this desire I had to work out all these stories I had in my head. Does that answer that, or I completely missed
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what were some of these? Tell us about what's an adventure travel magazine?
Essentially, for hiking, hill walking, trekking magazines. So you have, I think, in the States, you have Outside magazine and the
Right.
Backpacker.
Right.
So the equivalent magazines in the UK, I did a lot of hiking, a lot of climbing, mountaineering, that kind of thing. And I just started writing, and I'm a sort of semi-professional. I get paid to do photography on a sort of commission basis from time to time. And so I just started pitching to these magazines, so these hill walking, trekking, sort of wild camping magazines, saying that I could write pretty cool articles for them. And they liked what they ended up doing quite a lot of it. And then there came a point where I ended up working for a magazine that was quite a young magazine. It was an internet magazine. And we sort of produced a number of print editions which are doing really well, and I stayed on as the editor. So it's essentially sort of anything from polar expeditions all the way down to a guy called Alistair Humphreys, who was the National Geographic Adventurer of the Year, or one of the nominees for that award a couple of years ago. introduced this concept called micro adventures, which was essentially just a way to get people out of their homes and into places that they'd never been before, camping out in the woods, backcountry travel, that kind of thing. So it's anything outdoorsy, really.
Gotcha. And were you writing fiction did some of these magazines have fiction elements, short stories,
No.
or things like that? Okay. So you were just taking the experience of that and
Yeah.
letting that feed the creativity for some fictional accounts that you came up with?
Yeah, essentially, I think I would be out, say, in the Alps or in hills in Norway or Scotland or wherever, and then the style that I would write the experience in was more akin to a fiction, a story, than it was to, say, a journalistic feature article. So I think my style was naturally towards trying to draw the reader in to an experience by almost telling the story of what had happened in a way that suited fiction a little bit more clearly than it did journalistic style. And I remember there just came a point where I was on my way home from work, a conference and a drugs case that I was doing, and I downloaded onto my Kindle. Thank God for Kindles. You can't just download stuff.
Amen.
Isn't it fantastic? I'm sitting on a train coming back from Gatwick Airport from this conference with like the U.S. Customs. It was our equivalent of the customs guys, and I just thought, do you know what? I'd love to download a book on how to write fiction, because I'm sure it was back in those days when I thought you had to be talented. You couldn't teach yourself to write fiction. And there was a fantastic guy called James Scott Bell. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he writes brilliant books on, how to write fiction. Plot and Structure is a fantastic book, and Tension and Suspense is another one that he's written. And both of them, the opening line, you can learn how to do this. And so I downloaded one of these books, and I was reading through it, and I just suddenly thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to give this a shot. And I think that was 2013. March 2013, I wrote my first book, which was a spy thriller of all things, because it was roughly akin to what I was doing at the time. It was a international crime spy thriller sort of thing. And it's
so
still
you were an international criminal spy, is what you're saying?
I can't. Well, yeah, hold on. Let me just. Is David Gatewood online? Is he? Because this will go.
I've got him on the other line. Just waiting.
Hold on. I can hear this tapping noise. For the FBI out there, no, I'm not. No, I was a prosecutor. I worked for the Crown Prosecution Service for a long time, and I was doing cases involving serious crime, so various things, murders and big drugs cases, but also organised crime and some terrorist cases as well. So as a consequence, the sort of issues that arise in the spy thrillers, the Le Carré books and those kind of things, Tom Clancy and so on. I had some experience with some of that in a more criminal context than, say, Russian KGB and the SVR and so on. So that was kind of where I was coming from when I was writing that kind of thing. It never saw the light of day, thank God, because it really is awful. Although I kind of think I'd like to redo it one day and maybe see whether people like it, but certainly not for some time. And that's where that's where it sort of started, really.
So that book was obviously a catalyst to give you the confidence to write. I've talked to many different people and have asked a version of this question. Do you seriously think that anyone can write fiction? Is it a gift? Is it a skill that is learned? Is it a combination of both? Or do you think we as humans all have this storytelling element inside of us that obviously can be honed and perfected and worked on as a craft, but do you think that is available to anyone to do?
I would say this. When I was a kid, I played football. You would call it SOCCER. I refuse to say the S word. It actually upsets me. So I would play football when I was a kid, and I was pretty good. I had some trials with clubs. I was at a decent level, but I was not talented at all. I was good because it was all I really enjoyed doing as a kid. That was physical, and so I would skip classes to go and play football. I would be late home because I'd been playing football. It was the first thing I did when I arrived at school. Mum used to buy me 12 pairs of pants every time we went out shopping for school uniform because I'd rip them. That's all I did was play football. And, as I say, I was pretty good, but there were guys who were just so much better than me. And I think the thing with writing is that if you do something long enough and work hard enough and look deep enough, you can be good. And almost anyone, I suspect, can be good at it. But there will always be people that can't play football no matter how hard they try because they just aren't suited to a physical sport, And in the same way, there will always be people that just aren't suited to writing, either because they don't have the patience or their imaginations wander too quickly and want to do something else. So I would say hesitantly, because I don't want to stop ever anyone doing what they genuinely want to do. But I think there are people who will be brilliant writers who are naturally gifted. But I still suspect all of those people have to work really hard just to get to the level that they're at. So, the sort of Arundhati Roys of this world, the Flannery O'Connors, William Boyd, Ian Banks, all of these really fantastic literary guys, and the Hugo winners that we all look up to and think, wow, your stuff's just amazing. These are incredibly talented people who've worked really hard. And then I think there's a layer of people who also work really hard and have some talent, but really they've got where they have because they've learned how to do it. They've deconstructed these brilliant books and worked out what makes these great books tick. But they just don't have that final thing that makes them masters of that. So I would say my answer is probably no. I don't think everyone can be because they just don't have the emotional makeup. They don't have the natural sort of raw materials that it takes to be a writer, which is just the ability to actually convey what you're thinking about in a way that speaks to other people. But I think most people, a very large proportion, will be able to learn how to produce something reasonably compelling. So I think it's less about the gift and it's more about hard work. I think hard work's more important to more people than natural raw talent.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you there. And for sure, I think most people, especially if you have an inclination to tell stories, I think with hard work you can put something out, and maybe it's just for your friends and family, but yeah, I think the level of success that you achieve probably is a direct result of how hard you work at it and how many hours you put into developing your craft. And
Absolutely.
the saying is, the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Yeah.
I'm a strong proponent of that.
I think God, was it Edison who said, was it genius is 99% in perspiration, 1% inspiration, that kind of thing. And I think ultimately that's the truth of it, is that for the vast majority of authors who are published, and by that I mean either traditionally or self, I think those people are gaining readership through genuine hard work rather than some immense God-given talent. I don't think, I'm probably going to be slammed for this, but I don't think the vast majority of authors that are out there writing at the moment have an immense amount of talent. They just work really hard at understanding their place in the craft and what the art of storytelling is all about. And I think it's just, truthfully, it's really hard work. And it's a lot of reading as well. I remember reading On Writing once by the famous Stephen King book, which actually at the time I wasn't particularly impressed with as a book on how to write. But
Right.
the essence of it, that kind of, you've got to read a lot and write a lot. I think it had messages that spoke to me in a way that I didn't realise how compelling they were when I was reading it. But the truth of it is, you don't get to be a great writer or even a competent writer without reading a ridiculous amount of other people's brilliant books and working out why they're brilliant.
I completely agree, and I have such a love-hate relationship with that book.
Yeah,
I talk about it all the time because it's one of those books that I've gone back and I've reread several times, and I appreciate different parts of it at different times in my
yes,
life and my writing.
absolutely.
And you're absolutely right. As a young writer reading that book, there were several things that he said that I just, scoffed at or whatever. Like, whatever, Stephen, you don't get it. And, it says me to the guy who's published,
What would you know,
700
Stephen?
books. Yeah, what would you know, Stephen? And, but yeah, the, to really be a competent writer, you have to have a broad palette to paint from, and you
Yeah.
only get that from lots and lots of reading and lots of putting your thoughts on paper. It only happens that way. There's no magic pill. There's no magic beans that you can buy at the market, and it's just not going to happen. You've just got to put the work in.
Joe, I had a very interesting discussion with another author, one of the No Way Home authors, Elliot Brandis, and what we were talking about today was the difference between traditional publishing in the past and self-published authors, and when they're likely to break out, if they're going to break out, and what that means for their first few books. And I think we both came to the conclusion that say, Stephen King, the brilliant story that I love is that you probably heard this. I can't remember if it was actually in On Writing or not, but Carrie was the fifth novel he ever wrote, having been a journeyman short story writer for various sort of magazines and periodicals. And so he writes Carrie, which I think is his fifth novel, hates it, dumps it in the bin, and his wife fishes it out of the bin, reads it, and says, Steve, this is brilliant. What are you playing at? And the rest is history. And I think that's the thing with self-publishing at the moment, is that the first 5 books that we write still actually get out there. And there's an argument to say that we've cut our teeth on the things that nobody else initially would see. And is that something that's actually a bit dangerous for us? Or is the truth of it that the reality is we don't really have any choice, because in order to get our work out there and learn at the same time, we've got to do what's more akin to what Elliot Brandis called, learning on the job. And you publish all your stuff, and you're kind of at risk of people, slagging it off, because it's where you're still cutting your teeth. And there's an argument to say, well, that's where traditionally published writers, had an advantage in a sense, because all of the stuff that they wouldn't have published, no one ever saw, and therefore no one was able to criticize. But I wonder, don't we learn more in a way because the stakes are higher for us, because we have to get it right, because it's going out there, and if you're serious about your career, if you're serious about writing and about people reading your stuff, then actually, in a sense, almost the stakes are higher for you, because it is going to get out. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, that's a great point, and one great thing about self-publishing and the self-publishing community is I have found no shortage of people. I would say peers, but peers that have become mentors because they were farther along in the process than I am, and more successful than I have been at points, and that have offered their guidance and their experience to help me with things. And that's something I feel like that we have in self-publishing that maybe a lot of traditional published people don't get, because they're slogging away in their bedroom writing books, and they send them out to agents, get very little feedback, and then that book goes in a drawer and they start typing the next one. So yeah, it's not perfect that young writers are getting their first things published, but maybe throughout the process that we've got, people are mentoring others, and there's a new kind of apprenticeship coming available.
I completely agree, and I think when we spoke for the first time when we did the Tinfoil Roundtable, I think that was one of the key points that everyone made. That there is actually a fantastic indie author, particularly speculative fiction community. I mean, there's a broader one than that, but I don't really know most of the say the romance authors or even the fantasy authors. I suppose
Right.
I don't know a great many of those, but there's a nucleus of really fantastic authors with varied experience levels who are absolutely willing to share their experience without wanting anything. I think that's the beauty of it. So, you're looking at people like Susan K. Quinn, for example. I've got a great deal of respect for Sam Peralta, Michael Bunker. Hugh Howey was the guy that, as I think I said in the Tinfoil interview, he was the guy that got me self-publishing in the first place. And I was stunned when, this guy who's clearly got thousands and thousands of fans, who must be emailing him all the time, replied 3 or 4 times to emails I sent him saying, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And he was completely giving of his time. And that's what I've found throughout the indie author community is it's really easy to get great alpha and beta readers who are also authors and who will go through your book in a way that might as well be developmental editing and just tear it apart, in a
Right.
10-page document that they then send you and say, this is what's wrong with it. Obviously,
Right.
they were very short documents with my books, there was mostly
Obviously.
just how many different ways can we say awesome? But, I've dedicated, actually, God, this sounds really a bit funny, but I've dedicated Shrout to 2 authors that I met, Esther Fairbrother and Alex Roddy, both of whom wrote for No Way Home. And, these are the 2 guys that have been reading my stuff from day one and putting hours and hours of work into beta reading it, or, alpha reading, as I think it's probably better called, and really going through it and saying, this character, that character, that, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, this is great, this works really well. And in Shroud, there's a sequence where I bring two books from my earlier series together, 2 sets of characters into this quite long revelation scene, or sequence, I should say. Yeah, and the one thing I wanted from Sandra and Alex was, what does this work? Is it smooth? Are the transitions working? Is it too much information? Is it too little? Does it answer the question? And they don't need to give that time, but they do. And it's just fantastic, really. And I think, yes, you're right. We have this tremendous advantage in that respect over traditional publishing, because I just don't know if that exists for traditionally published authors. But for us, well, yeah, it's a very nice, close-knit community. It's very supportive, and I've been really impressed by that, and it's great to be a part of it.
And hopefully we're growing to the place that we can take advantage of the things that the traditionally published folks have taught us, and the things that self-publishing has taught us, and we can all become better writers because of the journey that all writers have taken.
Yeah, I think the truth of it is, we want to put out 300, 400, 500 pages that people pick up and can't put down until the last page, and then they breathe out and go, holy shit, that was just brilliant. Want to read more from this guy. That is what we're looking for. We're looking for the experience that we had, when we first picked up Lord of the Rings or Dune or Neuromancer or any of those books that were life-affirming, game-changing, books that just changed everything that you thought was real and turned it on its head. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking to inspire in people that reaction. And you can only get better if you're writing and publishing. I think you will only, if you continue to do that and also push yourself to read new stuff and work out, what is making this brilliant.
I completely agree. Let's dig into your published work. So you wrote this spy novel. What did you do with it?
It's sitting on Scrivener right now. So
okay.
Well, I think in one sense I had a very troubled relationship with this book. In one sense, it was great because it was a way to kind of scratch an itch. I'd always wanted to write something like that, in addition to sort of writing fantasy or science fiction. And in another way, it was a brilliant way to make mistakes and learn, because I genuinely feel that there's only so much you can get from reading even the best books by, James Bale and all those sort of guys. There's only so much you can get from those books. And I think when you sit down and you truly write, then you start to realize how much editing is important, how to edit, how to write a first draft. Those sort of skills that probably we're starting to take for granted because they're almost muscle memory, natural reactions now.
Right.
I think the reality is that you don't learn how to write a book unless you write a book. You have to actually physically be doing it. So to a certain extent, I remember sitting in a pub one night with a friend of mine, and he was asking me how it was going, and I just said to him, which I think is probably the truth, I probably will never publish this. It is my apprenticeship. It is me learning by doing. And it may never see the light of day. Certainly won't in its current format. Although I do have an idea how to, tinker with it a bit into something a little bit different. But that's a project for way down the line. But for me, it was a way to experiment with relative freedom and make mistakes that I'd like to kind of get it out now and read through it and see what my language is like, how the structure works and so on. I did have it edited as well. It was edited, in fact, by a famous science fiction writer, and she also writes some fantastic books on character and plot and that, called Ros Morris. And I did that largely without really thinking about publishing it. I think it was a case of, well, this is a brilliant way for me to actually learn by having it developmentally edited. In a really
getting actual
way.
Feedback on it.
Yeah, I mean, in a way that I could turn around one day and say, I almost set the stakes high enough that I might have published it, and so therefore, I had that mindset where I was thinking, the pressure's on, you've got to get this right because other people are going to read that, and so in that sense, it was a dual purpose editing, because not only was I learning by listening to what she was saying about my particular manuscript, but I was almost looking at it in that way that one day it might be published. Although now, I don't know. I've no idea. But I learned a lot. I learned a great deal from that book.
So tell us about Beyond the Wall.
Okay. So The Heretic was the product of about a year's worth of note-taking on a world that I quite like the look of. And I've said, I think, on my Amazon page, I think I've said that it was at least in part inspired by Joss Whedon's Firefly. And, I loved Firefly. I was really, really upset when it got canned. I think more so than I have been with any other show. And I think there was an element of Firefly. Most people will read elements of Firefly in The Heretic. And there are a couple of little homage moments, so the way that I've named certain characters and, the way that I've done some of the language. But I was only ever going to do that for The Heretic. It was sort of my way of saying, I really enjoyed this series, and in part it inspired me to write certainly The Heretic. But Beyond the Wall is very different from Firefly. And I think it was an organic thing. I think, again, I was learning the process of world building as I was writing the Heretic, and as I was expanding the world at the same time. And this it's set around 400 years in the future, after a cataclysmic event caused, we are told, by climate change, has brought about the end of the Earth. And essentially, at the end of the first book, some of it's explained by one of the main characters, and I do point out at this stage, it's through the voice of that character and not through me that this comes. And so readers really ought to consider who is telling them the story. It's not a third-person omniscient narrator. It's a particular character, and therefore that character's motivations come into play. But ultimately, a corporation discovers interstellar, or the capability to engage in interstellar travel, and a number of people are saved and new colonies are formed. But after a civil war, this authoritarian regime grows up out of the ashes of that war, and clamps down on humanity in order to preserve its future. And that's where we find ourselves at the start of the Heretic, being governed by the consulate magistratus, this kind of semi-Roman Empire kind of figure, that is a very authoritarian, dystopian type regime that allows very little in the way of freedom. And that's essentially the start of something that rolls on to being much bigger. There's a revolution coming, but where is it coming from? Why is it coming? And who's going to be involved? And the story is told through the eyes, over the course of the series, of a 14-year-old boy who comes from a very backward sort of planet, a low-tech border planet. A smuggler who I think a lot of people have compared to Malcolm Reynolds, and Han Solo as well. So he has elements of all of them, bless him. And then in the second book, Defiance, we meet Weaver, who is a sesteri, kind of a lawman, a policeman, detective, operative, who is on the hunt for a murderer from the core, which is the central sort of system of planets where the seat of the government, the magistratus, comes from. And this person who's committed the murder, Natasha, is a navigator, and by her very nature, she's hunted anyway. She has this almost arcane ability to see wormholes, which is how interstellar travel is conducted. And through the books, we meet a number of other guys as well. But all of these people are going to be brought together in Shrout, and the reason why they're brought together is revealed. And I think maybe that's why it was such a hard book to write, to make that sort of bring them together, draw those threads together in a way which would be compelling and explain the vision that I had for the book. So it's kind of a hard science fiction space opera, but really dark in its telling.
So the first novel you wrote is a spy, international spy, espionage type book, and then you go to hard science fiction. Yeah. And you, in your personal life, are an outdoor adventurer. How did you make that transition, and how did the hard science fiction become the thing that you were most passionate about when the writing of your first book was, it sounds like, very much informed by your real life day job and had a very real level of expertise in there? How do you shift gears to this space opera?
Well, I'm obviously, in my other life, I'm a 14-year-old boy and a space smuggler like Han Solo.
Of course.
Do you know, I have no idea, Hank. I couldn't tell you. Ultimately, I've always...
And I don't mean that disparagingly at all, because, no. We all, when we sit down to write the things that we're really passionate about, I think sometimes people look at us askance because they didn't know that was inside us. But
my better half, bless her cotton sock, she just looks at me and says, "Why are you writing science fiction when you have all these great criminal, crime stories that you could write. Why are you writing science fiction? And my answer is because, I was probably 5 or 6 when I picked up my first or science fiction book and started reading through it and thinking, wow, this is just fantastic. I think it's always been there, hard science fiction rather than, say, space opera. Although I loved Star Wars, truly loved it. One of those incredibly geeky people who could from it and all that kind of thing. And even did a bit of role-playing, Star Wars role-playing and all that kind of stuff. I loved it. But to me, if I ever wanted to write a book, I wanted to write aliens. I wanted to write that really sort of dark, gritty, utterly real science fiction, where you could just, it wasn't about this incredibly heroic, almost unbelievable stunt type stories that were going on. I wanted to write stuff that was much sort of, I don't want to say darker in case, people are listening to this and thinking, my God, it sounds appalling. But those books that just, you could all taste the cordite after the bullets have left the chambers, that kind of really gritty, real fiction that I always really enjoyed. And I think that's why, for example, rather than some of the more fantastic stuff, I really love Aliens and, say, Predator, because they had that, Terminator, those sorts of films, they just really had a kind of a hard sci-fi element to them. And I just really enjoyed it. And in terms of, the sort of books that I liked, it was the same kind of thing. I don't know why. I would like that when I was so much in love with Star Wars, which I think is about as far away from hard science fiction as it's possible to get. But it just sat really, really well with me, and perhaps it had a lot to do with my career before, because that was so geared towards an analytical process that was rooted in realism more than anything else, because evidential proof of any particular fact as necessary for a jury trial, I doubt there is any more real than that. I don't think it gets any more real than having to prove something as a fact, and maybe that's what sort of drew me to it. I don't know.
Did that help in your world building? Your familiarity with the law and with and what you did as your career when you're building this new society. I would think that would be a very real influence on the decisions you made with your world building.
I think it was important for me to construct a world or a setting where, although it was dystopian, it was an authoritarian regime, but that the regime had a reason to be the way that it was. That there was a system of government that existed for a reason and was successful for a reason. And I think in that sense, looking at the law, and in a sense, the law in itself is reasonably authoritarian by its very nature, although democratic in the best sense, because especially with a jury trial. I think, yes, it had an impact because it automatically made me more interested generally in systems of government, in sociology, politics, and I did an international law master's degree before I started studying law in terms of practice, with a view to practicing law. And so as a consequence of that, the international relations and international criminal law, international law in general, all of that was very interesting to me. And so, yeah, I think it had an influence, certainly. I think it made me look in more detail at how things worked rather than just accepting that they did. And therefore, I hope it made the setting more compelling and believable as a result.
My son and I this morning were having a conversation, and he is in college, or as you guys say across the pond, at university, pursuing an English degree. And we were talking about an idea that he had for a science fiction story, and the topic of hard science fiction versus, kind of space opera and that sort of thing came up. What do you think about the science fiction purists that demand that their hard science fiction be the very true and very real and very technically accurate?
I think it's rubbish.
Me too.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think categorization of any genre is only useful as an aid to the reader to find something that he is likely to enjoy. And beyond that, I could not give a toss what you call a particular type of book. It's useful to me to dip into Amazon's hard science fiction lists, not only because it's fantastic to see mine right at the bottom of them all the time, but it's great because you look at these books and you think, I'm likely to enjoy these because they are at least generally the sort of thing that I will probably go for. Whereas, for example, it's actually quite rare that I will go cyberpunk and look at that because, that's not what I'm looking for at the moment. That may change. But categorization, I think that's all it is. It's for readers to work out, is this something that I want to spend my time on? And so, I'm all for science fiction purists, many of whom have been writing a great deal longer than me and probably know a great deal more about it than me. I'm happy for them to say, we abhor the dilution of our particular subgenre with all these semi-hard science fiction books, because I'm more than happy for them to have whatever opinion they want. Of course I am, because that's society that we live in. But I don't see where it comes from. I don't see the benefit to anyone in rigidly applying categories to anything, when at the moment one of the most popular things that any author can do is to cross genre. And it's especially these subgenres, these categories that we have. And I think it's impossible actually to write hard science fiction in the true sense these days. And there are some events in Shrout of Night and Tears where I kind of think, well, I'd categorize it as hard science fiction because I've tried to stay true to what I imagine technology can achieve, and I'm very fortunate to have a guy who is an undergraduate theoretical physicist who reads all my books and says, well, that's appalling. That just wouldn't happen. What are you playing at? And then I'll rewrite whole sections to accord with that. And ultimately, isn't that makes mine, in a sense, hard science fiction because it's logically accurate in the sense of where we should be with it. But there are elements that will appear in Shrout that might take it outside of hard science fiction. And so I don't think categories are necessarily helpful, except to readers, for them to be able to find what they're looking for in a book without having to search the millions of books that exist.
Yeah. Well, and I think it does a disservice to science fiction in general, or speculative fiction, or whatever you want to call it. If you look back to the science fiction greats of, say, the 1950s, with Heinlein or Hubbard or whomever, the guys that really lit the spark, for the space race and things like that, they were talking about things that couldn't be proven at the time. But it sparked the imagination of, shall we say, real scientists, and air quotes here, that then took those stories that raised the collective imagination and pushed them to pursue those things. And just because we have way more information now, I don't think we should stop the dreaming and imagining and, seeing where we can push technology and humanity.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the projects that I'm working on with Alex Roddy at the moment is just that sort of thing. It's what I would call the old school classic pure adventure, that pure space exploration type of feeling that you get from shoving an enormous ship and saying, "Go tell me what's there." And I think Interstellar was probably one of the sort of films that really crystallized it for me, maybe for a lot of others. There's a tremendous interest right now, and I was discussing this with Jen Fona Wells when I was talking to her about the forward for My Home, and there just seems to be more excitement right now for space and the exploration of space, and for projects like Kepler, for the photos coming back from Hubble, for the all of these incredibly innovative, adventurous expeditions that are going on at the moment. And I don't know whether it's Twitter or Facebook, and this fantastic ability for everyone to be informed almost instantly, and to see images that they never would have seen before. But there's this almost golden age now of space exploration where we're not looking at the moon anymore, and we're looking way beyond it, and everybody wants to know, well, how does that work? Is there ice on Europa? Does that mean that once there was a alien life that might have existed there, even if it's microbial? I just think people are seeing something out there that they haven't seen for years. The sort of excitement about space exploration, I doubt has been here since maybe the 80s, and definitely the 60s. So I think it's incredibly exciting right now.
Well, yeah, and you've got books like The Martian by Andy Weir, which if
how
there
good
was
is
ever,
that
that's amazing. But if there was ever a hard science fiction book, it's that.
Yeah.
But told in a way that is very accessible.
Yeah.
And still very imaginative. But if you hear interviews with Andy, he talks about all the math that he actually worked out. And he would spend days working out a math equation just to write 2 sentences in the book, because it had to be just right. But to me, that's an example of a book that still is pushing boundaries and is very accessible for the average reader, but is hard science fiction.
Yeah.
But I think there's room for all of those things, and we shouldn't be scared to push toward those. Tell me about No Way Home. We mentioned it a time or two, but what is this collection that you put together?
Well, I didn't know at the time what I was doing, but I reached out to a number of self-published authors who were kind of round about the same position as I was in terms of how many books they had out, how long they'd been doing it, that kind of thing. So, we were all reasonably similar in terms of the level of success that we had for ourselves. Alex Roddy was one who wrote in the book as A.S. Sinclair. 'Cause Alex Roddy actually writes Victorian mountaineering fiction. I think Alex himself would say he probably couldn't have narrowed that niche any more than he had done. But, fantastic kind of these mystery books based on the golden age of alpinism, which is obviously something very close both to his and my heart. So Alex wanted to write some science fiction as well, and I remember us discussing whether he actually needed a pseudonym, and eventually he said, well, there's such an enormous gulf between the two genres that I'd be writing in that in the end he decided to take a pseudonym. But Alex, S.W. Sandra Fairbrother, both of them I'd known from sort of alpha and beta reading my work. Then a brilliant guy who is just, when you talk about the people who are really accessible and fantastic to deal with and just lovely, lovely people, Mike Hicks is top of my list for that. He's just, he writes kind of, I think I recently compared him to a mix of Robert Crace, who writes fantastic, really close-lipped, sort of clean thrillers, and Philip K. Dick. And I just think he writes these fantastic sort of cyberpunky books called the DRMR series. Number 2 just came out, and I'd invited him along to this group that I was sort of creating, along with Elliot Brandis and a girl I knew, Nadine Matheson, whose first book had just come out, although nothing to do with science fiction. And I said, look, why don't we pool our ideas? Because obviously self-publishing was new mostly to all of us, and we sat down and said, well, if we bounce ideas off each other, maybe we can make a go of this. And one of the ideas that I had was that we write an anthology between us, a bunch of short stories based around a theme. And the theme I posited initially, which was being stranded, and we came up with the No Way Home title for the book later on. And essentially, it was just a speculative fiction anthology based on the theme of being stranded. So unlike the fantastic Future Chronicles, or the Chronicles as they now are, so Sam Peralta sort of takes robot, AI, dragon, and he builds his themes around specific things within that genre. We were building it around an almost emotional state of being, which I thought would make it sufficiently different to appeal to the same audience, but in a different way. And so we wrote these stories just to see what happened. I can't even say that it was necessarily with a view to publishing them. I think we were just, seeing where we'd go. And the stories that came through were so brilliant. I really, really was surprised at just how good these stories were. I mean, Mike Hicks' Revolver is probably the one that is quoted most often as being the one that people read and went away and just couldn't stop thinking about. And it's a very disturbing story. And I remember actually, doesn't know this actually, so this will be fun for him to hear. I remember at the time actually reading it and emailing Sandra and saying, "Geez, this is really close to the bone. Should we talk to Mike about this and say, Mike, it's a hard story for people to read. It's the first anthology that we're putting out. Is it maybe not in our interest to be quite so hard hitting when we don't have that background?" And Sandra just said, "Don't be such an idiot. This is a great story. Let's just run with it. People will be fine." And it turned out to be one of the stars of the anthology, and Sandra herself, hers was probably one of the others. And I think also Harry Manners is one of the other guys, and his story I particularly loved, very much in the vein of The Martian, but with this real psychological aspect to it. How being almost stranded on Mars would affect you mentally, although his story wasn't quite about being stranded. But in the end, the stories were so good, to my mind anyway. Alex, Roddy and I Alex runs his own editing business, and we edited, both of us, between us, and we had them beta read by others, and it's just done really well. And I remember saying, after we'd had so much success, and it featured number one list in the UK, it was hot new release number one for ages. Every time you saw one of Sam Peralta's Chronicles books, No Way Home was right next to it. And that's, that meant a lot to us, because Sam's been doing this for a long time, and he's been doing it at a very, very high level. These are great, great books that he's producing. And so to just be next to those was great. And so I said to them, should we do another one? And God, they jumped on me. And so the next one we're looking at producing, the theme will be crime and punishment in a speculative fiction context, and we'll be looking at sort of August or September to produce that. And we'll see we'll go. And I think Sam Peralta's actually going to be doing the foreword for us.
Oh, nice.
On the first on Crime and Punishment. So I'm really, really excited about that. I'm really grateful to him for that.
That's wonderful. And we talked about it a fair amount on the Tales of Tinfoil Roundtable. That man, this is a really hot time for anthologies.
Yeah.
Well, for one, we've got lots and lots of great talent that are coming together to share resources and to share expertise and to, just kind of play off each other and off of the creativity. But I think that probably the reading public is really primed for these kind of collections now too, especially with the advent of Kindle and everything's so accessible.
Yeah.
And most of these stories can be read in a single sitting, or with or a couple of sittings. Most of these stories are really accessible, but really making an impact with people. As an author who has contributed to anthologies and who is also curating anthologies, if an author out there would like to get into that sort of market, how does one go about? I know most of these anthologies are invitation only, but how would an author position him or herself to catch the attention of some of these curators?
I think the answer is, if you look at what Hugh Howey did when he first started writing, so in 2009, I think it is, he produces Mollified and the Parsona Rescue, and that's it's a novella stroke novel. It's a decent novel.
Right.
He then, whilst doing that, I think he'd written maybe one, two, and three, and then suddenly he's just producing these short stories. And he's just publishing them, which is the beauty of Amazon, because you can easily do a 10,000 word, even 15 or 20,000 word, get a cover for it and put it out there. And you lose nothing by doing that. Apart from perhaps, I suppose there's an argument at the moment that poor selling books might have an impact on visibility of others as far as the Amazon algorithms are concerned. But setting that kind of technical thing aside, Hugh put out The Plagiarist, Hurricane, these sort of, some were longer, some were shorter, and obviously the most compelling example is Wool, which was, I think, 10,000 words to start with, or something similar.
The Plagiarist was brilliant, by the way.
Yeah, it's probably one of the few things of Hugh's that I've never read, but I just thought, when I read the blurb, I thought, yeah, that's going to be fantastic, actually.
I love it so much more than Wool, and I know that I'm probably a very small minority, but anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But that's the thing, isn't it? This is the beauty of it, and Jason Gurley is fantastic at this. He wrote the last Rail Rider was the first Gurley short story that I ever read, and I read it on a train of all places, and it was just
how meta is that?
I just, the end of it, I was like, wow, this is just amazing,
Yeah.
And I just thought, this is a great way to flex my writing muscles, to get a story out there and have people see you. And so my answer to your question is ultimately write a short, publish it. Make people see it. Submit it to, Lightspeed and all those fantastic publications. But the problem is, you're going to wait months and months and months before it's published. So that, that's the opportunity cost that you've got to consider. But the truth is, you write something great and you put it out there. There are threads. So Sam Prouter, for example, in the Chronicles runs a thread where he essentially says, put your book here. When I get a chance, I'll read it, and if it's good enough, I'll come and knock you on the shoulder, which is exactly what he did with me. I think he read my story in No Way Home, and I think the same is true. It's slightly different for me because the anthologies that I'm curating are with a group of writers that I'm already working with, and so there are people emailing me already and saying that we'd really like to be a part of it. And I think in terms of the third and fourth anthologies that we're around ideas for, I might pull out of one of those just so that other people can have a go. And because I just don't have the time. I've got quite a lot of projects on the go at the moment. So I think the truth is just write something great, publish it, or send it to the curator of a series that you really like and say, look, this is what I can do. I'd like to be included. But it's just, it's like we were saying before, the more you write, the better you get, and the more people see what you're capable of, both in terms of the quality of your prose and the quality of your imagination.
Right. And I've been invited to write for a couple of different projects, and I can say it was directly attributed to not only sharing my writing with other writers, but also forming relationships with people, and just availing yourself of the community aspect that's going on, and being out there building relationships with people. All of those things factor into the success of a writer these days. It's not just, can you sit down and type on the keyboard? Can you build relationships with people? Can you write compelling stories? Yes, but can you can you be an active member of the community and produce good work? And those two things really go hand in hand these days.
I think I was interviewed recently because, as you know, when you release a new book, you'd like to be interviewed as much as possible so that you can get yourself visible and people can see you, and I think that's part of it. But one of the questions that I've been asked quite a lot, really, and obviously people would ask me because I've got this tremendous amount of experience in publishing the last 12 months, but the question that they ask you, what advice would you give to new authors? And I think the answer is you're not an author anymore. You're an author and a publisher, and you're both. You're 50-50
right.
on both. Now, I'm more than happy, and have always said this, I'm more than happy for anyone to go away and write whatever they want, however they want it, not get a great cover for it, and not edit it. And not actually learn how to create characters, not how to plot, structure plot properly, and those kind of essential storytelling elements. You can write whatever you want, and you can upload it to Amazon. And I wish you well, and it's entirely possible you'll do brilliantly well, and you'll be laughing at me from the other side of your catamaran. But the truth is, it's a job. Like every other, it's a business.
That's right.
And different people will have different elements of that to them. They will have this artistic side to them that wants to produce these fantastic stories, and they'll have this business side that wants people to actually see them. And they'll be, for me, it's probably 50-50. For others, it will be 70-30 in favour of being an artist rather than a publisher. And that's cool because it depends what you want from it. But one of the things about being a publisher is that I can't stand those people who tweet and on Facebook that kind of hashtag buy my book. Those people just hashtags actually give me a headache if there's more than two of them in a tweet. I just read them and I go away and have to say migraine pills. And I just think I rarely ever put anything that says please buy my book. I'll say it's 99 cents if you're interested. Thanks very much. Or it's, this is out now. This is my new book. Maybe run a launch party or that kind of thing. But, I don't think I've ever attended a launch party where I've ever spoken about a book, whether it's been one of mine or someone else's, the Tinfoil launch party or anything like that. I just don't think anyone wants to know. I think it comes back to what you're saying. It's all about being a human being on the internet. And
That's right.
Being true to yourself and having fun and not saying to yourself, I must sell books. Because the last people that will buy your books are the people that have to listen to you saying, buy my books. People will buy your books if they think you're cool and interesting, because they'll go have a look and they wouldn't be there even chatting to you unless they weren't vaguely interested in your genre in the first place. And a lot of the time it's just people have to understand it's an organic process, and you get more from chatting to authors, chatting to readers, than you ever would just by these random buy my book tweets. And I think the same is true just of getting invited to anthologies and to contribute to all these cool projects that are going on. You just have to get involved, and people need to like you. It's like wandering around at the party. If you're going to be in people's faces, they're just not going to want to talk to you, which is largely what happened to me with every girl I ever chatted about. So,
Oh, well. Lucas, I think that's a perfect place to end.
And you're going to cut that last bit, obviously.
No, I'm not.
Oh,
Absolutely. We're going to leave that, and we're going to be sure to send a copy to your wife.
Yeah, she'll just agree with all of it.
But this has been a fascinating chat. We're over an hour.
Yes, I'm sorry about that.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. But I think the biggest takeaway is be a human being and be someone that people like, and people will naturally gravitate toward your work and toward your art if you just portray yourself in a human quality. But
I think if
Lucas,
you look at the best.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, look at the best science fiction authors that you and I probably admire the most. They're all really, really good guys. Hugh, Jason Gurley's are fantastic. Susan K. Quinn, Jen Foner Wells. All those people who've been doing really, really well are doing well. Marco Clues as well. They're doing well because they built a following, not just because they were great authors, but because they were just actually really nice people. And I think you will sell books if you write good books, and you are just a nice person about it. That's right. That's it. I agree. That's the takeaway.
That's right. Lucas, tell everyone where they can find your work, and because you have proven that you are a fascinating human being, tell everyone where they can find your work. Tell everybody where they can find you, and they can buy all of your books.
Do you know the easiest place to find me is at the moment all of my books are on Amazon, and I'm on Select on Amazon, so I'm exclusive with Amazon. How much longer that will remain, I don't know, but at the moment it's in my interest to do that. So the best place to find me is or any of my books is on Amazon.com. And to look up my author page, they are all there. I won't read the URL out because people will just bleed from the eyes. But otherwise, to go to my website, lucasbale.com, or just to come and find me on Facebook. I think Facebook at the moment is a place that I tend to spend quite a lot of time. So as you say, a fantastic author community there. So if you ever want to find me, Twitter and Facebook, Twitter I'm at Bale's Pen. And Facebook, just Lucas Bale. And, I'm more than happy to chat to anyone about anything, as you probably realised to your cost tonight.
Thank you, Lucas. And
thank you.
It's been a fantastic interview, and I'll be sure to link to everything in the show notes. And one thing to just tag what you said about being in KDP Select for the readers out there, that means that you can pay a one-time subscription, a monthly subscription fee, and you can get all of Lucas's books for no extra cost other than the subscription fee. And if you ever see an author, when you go to their page, if there's the button there to read for free with Kindle Unlimited, you are helping authors by doing that.
Yep.
So we encourage people to do that. Lucas, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll send everyone to see you.
All right. Thank you very much.